So 9 minutes past 8 o'clock, and last week Lord Andrew Adonis resigned as chair of the National Infrastructure Commission in protest over Theresa May's management of Brexit. He described the process as a dangerous populist and national spasm worthy of Donald Trump, and that it caused a nervous breakdown in Whitehall. Well, to explain more is the former Labour minister himself, Lord Adonis. Very good morning to you, Lord Adonis. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So, in terms of resigning, you knew that the government were going to have to deal with Brexit. They're going to have to compromise. The population voted for this. Why suddenly the decision to resign?
Well, the withdrawal legislation, which actually takes us out of the EU, that comes before the House of Lords this month, January. And I was faced with a straight choice as to what I was going to do with it, because I have to take a stance on it in the Lords. And my view is that the hard Brexit that the Prime Minister is going for, which aims to take us out of the customs union, the single market, on which our trade depends, is the wrong course for Britain. I understand the vote that there was 18 months ago, and I think some of the supranational elements of the EU may have been right to have sought to negotiate our way out of those. But to take us out of the main customs and market arrangements of the European Union, on which millions of jobs depend, I just think is a big mistake. I also
Lord
think
Adonis, can I just... You're talking about...
want another vote on this and a final say on the terms.
Lord Adonis, can I just interject? You're saying you resigned, yes. Lots of people are saying that you resigned before you were pushed.
Well, I was an independent advisor, so the government gave no indication whatever before that they wanted me to leave. And had they wanted me to leave, this could, of course, have been a pretty damning indictment of the principle of having an independent advisor, because what's the point of having independent advice if you don't like it? But the other reason I resigned, there were two reasons. The first was the EU, but the second, which was closer to infrastructure, which was my actual job, was that I've been very critical of Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, and the way he's been handling the railways. I mean, we had today a huge fare increase, 3.4%. And while that fare increase is going through, Mr. Grayling has engineered a huge handout to private rail companies who have been facing losses, which I think was, again, a big mistake. And I made that clear. The government said they didn't welcome my advice. Well, if they won't accept advice from an independent advisor on how to handle infrastructure policy, then there's frankly no point in my being there.
OK, but can we go back to your comments on Brexit? People have called your comments and your interventions on Brexit as hysterical and deranged. How do you react to that?
Well, I'm doing my job, which is to say things as I see it. And
well, hang on. Let me just give you some quotes.
About saying that we should stay in the customs union on which our trade.
No. I'm talking about your comments, Lord Adonis. Please, let me put the question to you. I'm talking about your comments where you were saying that Brexit could be as bad as appeasement of Hitler's Germany in the 30s. That is hysterical.
I said as a mistake for the country.
Yes,
it was on a par with it.
You really believe that?
But, yeah, I do believe that. Not obviously, we're not dealing with the same situation as the 30s, but countries can make very, very big mistakes.
But you realise that's grossly offensive to the 75. Lord Adonis, you realise that's grossly offensive to the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU.
Look, let's be clear. We're a democracy.
We are. That's right, and we voted to leave the EU.
We don't give up our democratic rights just because we've had one vote and then say there are going to be no more votes. Democracy.
We did. We voted on one question, Lord Adonis, and it was to leave or to stay, and the vote was to leave. And you seem determined to try and thwart that.
No. My view of the matter is that as the final terms become clear on which we're going to leave, and of course nobody knew what those terms were going to be when we had the referendum 18 months ago. As those terms become clear, the people should have the final say themselves. I'm a complete Democrat. I think the will of the people.
Well, if you're a complete Democrat, why are you saying this about Brexit?
Can change.
If you're a complete Democrat. If you're a complete Democrat, why have you said what you said? You also said Mrs. May, probably one of the most pragmatic and level-headed Prime Minister we've ever had, was the voice of UKIP.
Well, the UKIP policy, of course, is to take us out of the European Union, and that is precisely
but that's
in a hard way.
That's
what the British people voted for. I mean, let me ask you. You talk about.
I mean, she has become the voice of UKIP, and it's just a statement of fact.
Well, that's.
But there were two.
But hang on a second, Lord Adonis. Hang on a second.
The EU, and she's gone for the hardest way, which serves all of our.
Well, she hasn't yet because we don't know what she's voting for. But let me just ask you this: do you think when the British people have voted, and you can say that a lot of people didn't vote for it, but the majority who were given the opportunity did vote for Brexit, yet you think that, unelected as you are, to travel to Brussels with Nick Clegg, also deposed from office, Ken Clarke, who seems to go against the government, to have conversations with the EU negotiator, Michel Barnier, that is deeply undemocratic, isn't it?
It's perfectly reasonable to have conversations. We weren't negotiating. It's the government that does the negotiations. But we're a democracy. We need open and transparent arrangements for how we're handling this Brexit, including having a good knowledge of what's going on in Brussels. I mean, I can't think of anything more important for parliamentarians like myself. I'm a member of the House of Lords, actually knowing what's going on in Brussels in these negotiations. But can I come back to this point about people voted for Brexit? There wasn't a Brexit proposition on offer in June.
There was one question: leave or stay.
Yeah, but what became clear immediately afterwards was that people had very different understandings of what Brexit meant. A lot of people had said, including those who wanted us to leave in 2016, that we would stay in the single market.
That's simply not true. Lord Adonis, that is simply... No, I'm sorry, that is simply not true. People who were asked after knew perfectly well...
The manifesto said before the previous election was that we would stay in the single market.
That is simply not true.
It is true. I'm afraid it's a straightforward statement of fact.
It's not a statement of fact. You keep on...
What's become clear...
Lord Adonis, are you going to take questions or not? Or are you just here to... Are you going to take a question? Or are you just... You keep on saying
I'm listening intently.
You keep on saying you're a Democrat, but your adulation of Brussels has exposed your contempt for democratically expressed views of those who voted leave.
I don't have an adulation of Brussels. I just think on a pragmatic basis, we're better in the single market and the customs union, on which, as I say, millions of jobs depend, than upon leaving it. And there are countries in Europe which are in the European trading arrangements. There are different ways of doing it, but they haven't left the European trading relations, who aren't in the EU.
But we don't want to do it that way.
Being Switzerland and Norway. No, but that isn't what was on offer in 2016. In 2016, it was a good deal of the campaign for leaving the EU is that it would be possible to stay in those arrangements. But as it becomes clear that we're not staying in them, my view is just very straightforward, which is
there
that
were many discussions.
The
people who voted leave knew perfectly well what leaving meant. It meant leaving the single union and the customs market.
I don't think most people had the faintest clue that.
Do you think you're cleverer than most people, Lord Adonis?
No, I'm simply saying what opinion polls show.
So you know the facts and the people who voted leave didn't?
No, I'm saying that at the time there was no proposition on the table that leaving the EU would mean leaving the single market and the customs union. But that's only become clear in the negotiations since. And that's why I said these negotiations continue. I think that the right thing is when they're completed, that the people should have the final say on whether they want the deal which Mrs May negotiates, which appears now to be taking us out of the customs union and single market, or whether they think we're better off staying as we are.
That may be clear, but let me just ask you, though. If we are approaching some kind of decision that has to be taken, is it right that people who are unelected are trying to interfere in a process which has been decided? That, for example, what is going on in the Lords, the hijacking continuously by those who want to stay, is making the government's job more difficult and arguably making the deal that we will get as a result of it worse. So your interference collectively is making this worse for the nation.
Well, it is quite amusing when the people who want to take us out of the European Union spend all their time saying this is about the sovereignty of Parliament and asserting the sovereignty of our own parliamentary institutions.
But that's not the question I asked.
That's the same old argument, Lord Adonis.
This is undermining that sovereignty. So I don't think that argument goes very far.
Can we ask you a question?
As far as the House of Lords goes, my own view of the House of Lords is absolutely not the role of the House of Lords to stand in the way of the people, but it is our role where we think that the Constitution is being undermined.
Lord Adonis, do you think
to see that the people have another say, and I think that may be what happens over the course of the next year.
Do you think the 17.4 million people who voted to leave are stupid?
I certainly don't. No.
So why aren't you listening to them?
Stupid. No, I think people over time, as more information becomes available and they see how events develop, often their views change. And also, of course, a lot of new voters have come in the register since in the last 18 months, and a lot of people who didn't vote last time. And as people look and see what deal is being negotiated in Brussels on something so important to the future of the country, it seems to be an absolutely reasonable proposition that having taken an initial decision of principle, but without knowing what the deal is going to be.
It wasn't a decision of principle. David Cameron said he would put into practice whatever the British people voted. It was not put to us at the time that it was voting on a matter of principle. That was not how that question was posed.
I'm simply giving you my view, which is that there's a big difference between an initial decision of principle and actually having the deal on the table. It's like moving house. There's a big difference between wanting to move house in principle and then actually doing the survey, seeing the house itself, looking at the further particulars. And people often change their mind when that happens.
Well, they do in
life, and it is in a democracy as well.
They do indeed. We must leave it there. Lord Andrew Adonis, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.